Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Juta Padakamalam Sri Gurun.
Hare Krishna, welcome back. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Vansha kalpa turuvishta kripashinda bevacham putitanam pavanebo vaishnaveva namo namaha om agyana timirandasa gyananchana shalakaya chukshush unnimilitangyam tasmai sri gurave namaha namo vishnu padaya krishna pristhaya bhutale shamari bhakti vedanta shami iti namane namaste sharashari deve gaudavani pracharine nirvishesha shunnavari prashtatta desha tarine. In the beginning of the 7th chapter, we were discussing the three main sections of Bhagavad Gita, how the middle section dealing with Bhagavad Bhakti is protected by the two outer sections. We explained how Krishna's concluding statement at the end of the 6th chapter, Yoginam abhisharavesham madgaten anta atmana shradavan bhajate jongmam samijukta uttamataha, is immediately carried on and connected to the first verse of the 7th chapter, wherein Krishna explains Shradavan Bhajate Joman, how the process of worshipping him with faith can be performed, beginning with hearing about him, and he's elaborately narrating the transcendental science of Krishna, Krishna Tattva, and Arjuna is hearing. This understanding of Krishna in the 3rd verse of the 7th chapter is not easily achieved by the impersonalists or the yogis, but can be very easily achieved by the process of Bhagavad Bhakti. We're explaining Krishna was narrating and describing ways that he can be seen through the material nature, how the conditioned soul is called Nitya Bada because his history of his material existence cannot be traced out. And we were discussing the significance of text number 14, where Prabhupada gives the analogy that Krishna is just like a kind and loving parent, and he delivers the devotee if he surrenders unto him. So after explaining the process of extricating oneself from the influence of the material energy by surrender unto Krishna, surrender unto Krishna means by beginning the practice of bhakti yoga and beginning the practice of serving Krishna. Of course, more detail on that is given by Srila Rupa Goswami Prabhupada in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, when he explains the practical activities of sadhana bhakti, and that is the first steps of surrendering to Krishna. Now Krishna goes on to explain the 4 classes of the duskritanaha who do not surrender unto him. Maya namam duskritanaha mudha prapadante naradama maya aparita jnana asharim bhavamashrita. And he explains the 4 classes of shukritina who do surrender unto him. Arta artati jigyashu, who do surrender unto him. Chatur vidha bhajante mam jana sukrita arjuna arta artati jigyashu gyani cha bharatashava. So let us explain these 8 different classifications. The mudha, Srila Prabhupada explains, is just like the gross materialist on the level of an animal, simply interested in sense gratification, is satisfied with sense gratification. The purpose of life is simply achieving sense gratification, and the mudha never thinks anything beyond that. The Nara Adam, Prabhupada is explaining, is higher in status because there is some semblance of civilized life, of culture, of society, of values, human values. However, this is the lowest level of humanity because it is devoid of Krishna consciousness, devoid of God consciousness, although there may be other aspects of social values, civility, morality, etc., but without God consciousness. It's called Naradam. The Maya Aparita Gyan is the learned scholars, philosophers, poets, literasts, etc., who may be very learned in the material science, material subject matters, but their knowledge is Maya Aparita. It is, Aparita means is covered, it is stolen by the material energy, it is misdirected. And we often find that the more a person becomes materially educated and subsequently sophisticated, the less inclined they are towards the humble surrender and service of the Lord. This is the difficulty we find in preaching in the Western world, that because in general people are highly educated in Western society. And Prabhupada sometimes used the analogy of slaughterhouse education, a slaughterhouse. I can remember my first reflections of going to school. It was in, I think, the first grade or perhaps even the preparatory grade. And in the first few days we learned the alphabet, A, B, C, D. And the first word that we learned to write was our own name. And actually we were given a card and we wrote our name on the card, and then we placed that around the classroom. So the very first lesson that we were indoctrinated in the material education was that we are this body. We are that name. We are this product of the material energy. In this way, our whatever interest, whatever inclination we had to spirituality is immediately indoctrinated out of the mind and the intelligence through the materialistic education system. So, and as one becomes more and more educated, he becomes more and more sophisticated and more expert in his resistance to service of the Lord. In a song, Bhaktivinoda Thakur sings that Jora vidya mayar bhaivav tumara bhajan bodha. Your devotional sentiments can become completely destroyed or can become stopped as a result of Jora vidya. Prabhupada himself personally shared that as a result of the influence and the association of the professors and teachers in the Scottish Church College in Kolkata, that he put on pause his regular worship of Radha and Krishna deities. Not that Prabhupada was influenced in an illusory way, but this is like some leela. Prabhupada's indicating the effect of association. And Radha and Krishna appeared to him in a dream and said, "Why are you keeping us in this box?" So of course Prabhupada's, the extent to which Prabhupada was influenced was very minor, but for us, normal conditioned souls, the extent to which we're influenced by the views of the materialistic philosophers and teachers and professors is very extensive. And in the academic world, those devotees who are working in and serving in the field of academia in preaching Krishna consciousness, that they're often found with great resistance, that when they're writing papers, that there cannot be any type of inclination in faith in God or belief in spirituality. It is not at all acceptable in the academic world. So this is, Prabhupada is elaborately describing the Maya Aparita Gyan, very learned scientists, philosophers, and the very determined atheists. And final category, the Asuram, those who are outright envious of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, those who are proactively trying to attack, trying to dismantle the efforts, the missionary efforts of the Krishna conscious devotees, and they're very much aggressive toward the propagation of Krishna consciousness. They are also not inclined to surrender to the Lord. They are called the Asuras. In text 16, Krishna explains the four classes of pious devotees who surrender unto him. Chatur vida bhajanti mam jana sukrita arjuna arto jigyashu artharti jnani char bharata shaba. The artha is the distressed, jigyashu, inquisitive, artharti, desirous of wealth, and jnani, the jnani, one who is searching after knowledge of the absolute truth. In the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Srila Rupa Goswami gives examples of these four classes of pious people. The artha, the distressed, he gives the example of Gajendra, Jigyashu, the sages at Naima Sharanya, Artharti, Dhruva Maharaj, and the Jnani, four Kumaras and Shukdev Goswami. Prabhupada in his purport comments that when these four kinds of persons come to the Supreme Lord for devotional service and are completely purified by the association of a pure devotee, they also become pure devotees. As far as the miscreants are concerned, as the Duskritanaha, for them devotional service is very difficult because their lives are selfish, irregular, and without spiritual goals. But even some of them, by chance, when they come in contact with a pure devotee, also can become pure devotees. This is very interesting. Because here Krishna is explaining that these people, namam duskritanam muda prapadante, they do not surrender unto me. However, Prabhupada is explaining that in the mood of Gaurasundar and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's preaching movement, that even such persons, when they come in contact with pure devotees, can also become pure devotees. But practically speaking, if we are to evaluate and consider our own background, that certainly myself and perhaps most of us, we are in the category of the duskritanaha, mudhas and naradam, and maya aparitaga, even asuras become devotees in the Krishna consciousness movement. There may be some mix there. We may also have some inclination of inquisitiveness, or even interest in gyan, or even desire for remuneration, or we may be suffering. But many of us are also elements of our life would place us in the category of the duskritanaha. And Krishna, therefore, not eligible, not inclined to, and not eligible to surrender to the Supreme Lord, because we had no piety, no sukriti. However, Mahaprabhu's preaching is such that he doesn't consider the sukriti or the duskriti. Actually, Kaviraj Goswami explains the preaching of the Panchatattva that patra bichanahe. The patra means the pot. It's for puja. Appropriate pot, a clean pot, a pure pot. It's called patra. And apatra is a receptacle that cannot be used in the puja. But in Mahaprabhu's distribution of prema, love of Godhead, in a Sankirtan movement, patra, apatra, qualification or disqualification, bicha nahe, nahishtan, ashtan, appropriate condition, appropriate circumstances, he doesn't consider. Jai jaha pai, taha kore prem dhan. Whoever randomly they came across the Panchatattva freely distributed, the love of Godhead in an indiscriminate way. Thakur Bhaktivinoda's describing the preaching style of Sri Nitai Goshai and Gaurasundar. Radha Krishna bolare shabhai, ishikaniya shabnadiya fiche neche Gauranitai. Radha Krishna bolare shabhai. So in this way, reflecting the Audarya Bhav and the mercy, Param Karuna, mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, even a Duskritanaha can also come to Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada certainly demonstrated that in his tremendously successful preaching and spreading Krishna consciousness throughout the Western world, which is full of the Duskritanaha. Prabhupada's commenting the mood of Nityananda Prabhu, particularly in the deliverance of Jogai Madhai. Dino hina jota chilo hariname udharelo tar shaki Jogai Madhai. The evidence of the indiscriminate the extent of Gaurasundar's mercy is that even Dina hina jota, regardless of Dina hina jota, means you cannot measure the extent of one's degraded condition. Dina hina, low birth, and disqualified and wretched souls, dinahina joto chilo hariname udharilo, can be delivered by the holy name. Are we just saying that? No. Tar shaki, the evidence is Jogai Madhai. That Madhai, he actually attacked Lord Nityananda. Jogai, he actually attacked Lord Nityananda, who was coming simply showing kindness upon the two wretched souls. And Jogai, he attacked Lord Nityananda. And Lord Nityananda was bleeding, and the blood was dripping down his cloth. And when Mahaprabhu saw that, he was invoked the Sudarshan Chakra. But the combined mercy, Parama Karuna, Bahu Duijan Nitai Gaura Chandra, Nityananda Prabhu, he appealed to Mahaprabhu. Let me take care of these. Because if you kill this guy, then you'll have to kill them all. Because we are all in this category. We're very much reluctant and even aggressive toward the preachers of Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada's commenting, Sri Nityananda Prabhu, who is the incarnation of Godhead as Divine Master, delivered the typical Naradams, the brothers Jogai and Madhai, and showed how the mercy of a real devotee is bestowed upon the lowest of mankind. So the Naradham, who is condemned by the personality of Godhead, can again revive. So Prabhupada comments. So the Naradham, who is condemned by the personality of Godhead, can again revive his spiritual consciousness only by the mercy of a devotee. Srila Prabhupada ki. Krishna goes on to elaborate further in text 17 and 18. Tesham jnani nitya jukta eka bhakti vishishyate priyo hi jnani otyatam aham shachama priya. That amongst those pious souls, the jnani is particularly qualified. Krishna is explaining that out of them, he who is in knowledge of the absolute truth and is free from all material desires becomes a really pure devotee of the Lord. Srila Prabhupada comments in his purport, the devotee in full knowledge is considered to be very dear to the Lord because his only purpose is to serve the Supreme Lord with love and devotion. It's not that devotees who are less complete in knowledge are not dear to the Lord. The Lord says that all are magnanas because anyone who comes to the Lord for any purpose is called a Mahatma, or a great soul. The devotee who wants some benefit out of devotional service are accepted by the Lord because there is an exchange of affection. However, the jnani has particular qualification because he is not pursuing any material remuneration from the Lord. And that's a particular quality that is appreciated by the Lord. And that devotee can very quickly make progress in pure bhakti. Krishna continues, Bahonam janamanamante jnanavanmam prapaddante Vasudeva saravamiti samahatma sudulabha. After many births and deaths, he who is actually in knowledge surrenders unto me, knowing me to be the cause of all causes, and all that is, such a great soul is very rare. Prabhupada describes the particular qualification of the jnani when it comes to approaching the Lord. He realizes the material world to be a perverted reflection of the spiritual variegatedness, and realizes that in everything there is a relationship with the Supreme Lord Krishna. That is Gyan, and that is his manifest realization, seeing Krishna everywhere, understanding the spiritual reality behind everything, is Jnanavan. Thus he thinks of everything in relation to Vasudeva, or Sri Krishna. Such a universal vision of Vasudeva precipitates one's full surrender to the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna as the highest goal. In lecturing on this verse in 1966, Srila Prabhupada commented in a very convincing way, if ultimately after many, many births I have to come to this point to surrender, so why should I take so much trouble for many, many births? Why not immediately? So if we take up this principle, this intelligence, then God is realized in 1 second. But if you don't, then go on with research work for many, many, many births. Prabhupada ki. Let's have a bit of a look at an overview of the 7th chapter. Verses 1 to 3, knowing Krishna in full by hearing about him. Verses 4 to 12, how Krishna is both the source of both the material and spiritual energies. Verses 13 and 14, we cannot see Krishna because the influence of the material energy, the whole universe is bewildered by the 3 modes. But by surrender to Krishna, we can overcome the influence of the 3 modes. Krishna orders the release of the conditioned soul through the process of surrender, out of mercy, out of reciprocation. Verses 15 to 19 describe 4 kinds of pious, 4 kinds of impious souls who are not inclined to surrender to the Lord, and 4 kinds who do. But Prabhupada comments that as a result of the special mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, even the Duskritanaha also can become influenced by association with devotees and take to Krishna consciousness. Now the remainder of the chapter describes those whose surrender is misplaced. Surrender to the demigods and the cultivation of the impersonalism. And the remaining verses of the chapter are dealing with the original cause of bewilderment of the living entities and knowledge of Krishna. Up to this point, Krishna has been explaining how he is the source of both the spiritual and the material worlds. However, Tribhir gunamayi bhava evi sarvam jagat mohitam nabijanati, bewildered by the 3 modes of material nature, mohitam nabijanati, the conditioned souls cannot see Krishna everywhere. The process of surrendering unto Krishna can deliver one from the influence of the 3 modes of material nature. Krishna orders the release of the conditioned soul after the practice of surrender to Krishna. And now Krishna is describing those whose surrender is misplaced. In text 20 he explains, Kamas taista rata jnana prapadyante anna devataha tam tam niyamam ashtaya prakritya niyata svaya. Those whose intelligence has been stolen by material desires surrender unto demigods and follow the particular rules and regulations of worship according to their own natures. Here we are in Mumbai, and just recently we've seen the worship of demigods here, and in Kolkata, Durga Puja. And we notice the Durga Puja ceremony, just as Krishna is describing here, that tam tam niyamam ashtaya prakrita niyata svaya, that they follow rules, the particular rules and regulations of worship according to their own natures. Just recently we were in Kolkata, and we were seeing the Durga Puja, worship of Sri Durga Ma. She is the in charge of the material energy, the female personification, as we described earlier, the shadow of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and she's supervising the material energy. And the Durga Puja ceremonies that we witnessed, just as Krishna is describing here, tam tam niyamam ashtaya prakrita niyata saha, that following the particular rules and regulations of worship according to their own natures. So we see that the Durga Puja ceremony is very much a materialistic event. People simply, it's a social event. It's a time of enjoyment and merriment, and like a mela, and families are going, and just like they would be going to the market, they're going, and there's so many small stalls set up, and they're shopping, and they're eating so many things, and they'll take darshan of Sri Durga Ma. But the priests are actually doing some puja. Durga Puja is going on, but in general, the people, their conditioned nature is not purified by that type of worship, the motivation and the objective is simply material remuneration, and this is a very popular ceremony. And we see that the process of worship in the Durga Puja, the process of worship actually is very much influenced by the conditioned nature approach. And therefore worship in that way doesn't actually elevate one in the same way that the transcendental devotional service of Lord Hari elevates one, where one is trained by the spiritual master in the practice of sadhana bhakti, whereby one can actually practice activities of spiritual life, and one's conditioned nature can become purified by association with the transcendental process. But we see that here that there may be some purification in the worship of demigods, especially in modern times where everything has become compromised. But the purification is very, very limited, very, very minute. And Krishna is explaining here that Rita Jnana, that one's actual knowledge, one is not developing knowledge as a result of this type of worship. The knowledge that Krishna has explained earlier in this chapter, that he is present everywhere, he is the source of the spiritual and material energy. One will not come to that realization as a result of worshipping demigods in the manner that we see popularly performed today. Krishna continues, Yo yo yam yam tunum bhakta shradaya chitamichiti tasha tasha chalam shradham tam eva vididhami aham. I am in everyone's heart as the super soul. As soon as one desires to worship some demigod, I make his faith steady. Tasha tasha chalam shradham tam eva vididhami aham. So he can devote himself to that particular deity. So Krishna actually is the provider of the Shraddha Chalam, the steady faith in that particular deity. However, the worshippers of the demigods, Krishna subsequently goes on to explain that they are less intelligent because they consider the demigods to be independent of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or they consider the demigods to be more equipped to fulfill their material desires, not understanding that they are simply representatives of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Sataya Shradaya Jukta, endowed with such faith, Tasharadana Mihete, they worship the demigods, Labadecha Tatakamam, and their desires are fulfilled, Tam Mayaiva Vihitam Hitam. But actually the whole system is arranged and facilitated by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. However, the demigod worshippers are unable to recognize the supremacy of the Supreme Lord, and they are attributing the benefits which they are receiving to their respective demigods. In this way, they are remaining somewhat in illusion. And Krishna explains in text number 23, Antavat tu palam tesham tat bhavati alpamedasam, that because the boons which are awarded to the worshipper of the demigods are antavat. Antavat means they possess an end. Antavat, they end, they are temporary. The palam, results of demigod, the boons that the demigods provide are temporary boons. The demigods themselves are in this material world, they're not liberated souls, and they cannot award eternal benefits or liberation. They can only award benefits in the material world. Sometimes Prabhupada gives an analogy like a criminal in the prison house. He may be able to elevate himself from the C grade cell to the B grade cell, or even the A grade cell. However, he remains a prisoner. So the demigod's boons are likened to this. And Krishna concludes his analysis of demigod worship here. Devan devan yujo yanti madbhakta yanti mamapi. Devan deva yujo yanti. Those who worship the demigods will attain the planets of the demigods. Madbhakta yanti mamapi. However, my devotees attain my supreme planet. In this way, Krishna specifically shows a very specific distinction between worship of the demigods and worship of himself. However, the people in general do not know this. Recently, I was in Sri Pundarik Dham in Purba Bengal, East Bengal, currently known as Bangladesh. We were celebrating Radhastami. And in Bangladesh, in our ISKCON festivals, we often invite local dignitaries. In this event, there was a constable of police, there are other members of the parliament, and there was also academics from the Chittagong University. One Muslim professor spoke on Radhastami and spoke very wonderfully, glorifying Srimati Radharani and Sanatan Dharma. And one Hindu professor also spoke, and he stood up and said, "Oh, Radha and Kali are the same." So Radha and Kali are the same. And this person was an academic and a supposed follower of Sanatan Dharma, a professor in the university. But people do not understand this clear philosophy, this clear principle that Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita. Devan, Deva Yujo Yanti, worship of the demigods, the Dev Devata, you will attain the planets of the demigods. Mad Bhakta Yanti Mamapi. But the worship of Krishna, by the devotee of Krishna, you attain the eternal abode of Krishna. Chakvadeha Punajanmanayati, Krishna explains in the 4th chapter. Chakvadeha Punajanmanayati, you will not take birth again. Mameti so Arjuna, but you attain the eternal transcendental abode. And this point is again clarified here by Shri Krishna. Prabhupada comments in his purport. Within the material world, the planets, the demigods, and their worshippers are all perishable. Therefore, it is clearly stated in this verse that all results achieved by worshipping demigods are perishable, and therefore such worship is performed by the less intelligent living entity. So Krishna has, up to this point, described misplaced surrender, worship of the demigods, and he's described them as alpamedha, less intelligent. And now, in text 24, he describes the impersonalists as abudhaya, unintelligent. The demigod worshippers are less intelligent, and the impersonalists are unintelligent. Those who are worshippers of demigods have been described as less intelligent persons, and here the impersonalists are similarly described. Persons who are under the impression that the absolute truth is impersonal are described as abudhaya, which means those who do not know the ultimate feature of the absolute truth. Let's take a look at verses 24 to 26 and the conceptual flow inherent there. Verse 24 is explaining Avyaktim Vyaktim Apanam Manyatem Mam Ubudhayaha Param Bhavam Ajanantam Avavyam Anutamam. Unintelligent men who do not know me perfectly think that I, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, was impersonal before and have now assumed this personality. Due to their small knowledge, they do not know my higher nature, which is imperishable and supreme. I am never manifest to the foolish and unintelligent. For them I am covered by my internal potency, and therefore they do not know that I am unborn and infallible. Vedaham samatitani vartamanani charjuna bhavishani chabhutani mam tu vedana kashtana. O Arjuna, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, I know everything that has happened in the past, all that is happening in the present, and all things that are yet to come. I also know all living entities, but me no one knows. So the conceptual flow in these verses is that in text 25, Naham prakashasarvasha yogamaya samabrita, I'm covered by my internal potency. Thus he remains unknown, mam tu vedana kashtana, he remains unknown to the unintelligent impersonalists, which are described in text 24. Regarding yogamaya samabritaha, how Krishna covers himself by his internal energy, Prabhupada gives an analogy in the purport to text 26. He is just like the sun, and Maya is just like cloud. In the material world, we can see that there is the sun and that there are clouds and different stars and planets. The clouds may cover all these in the sky temporarily, but this covering is only apparent to our limited vision. The sun, moon, and the stars are not actually covered. Similarly, Maya cannot cover the Supreme Lord. In text 26, Krishna explained, Mam tu vedana kashtana, that it's very difficult to know me. Hardly anyone knows me. And in text 27, he explains how and when the living entities became covered by Maya, what is the reason, what is the cause of us becoming covered by Maya. And texts 28 to 30, which take us to the end of the chapter, Krishna explains how to get free from Maya. In text 27, Icha dvesha shamutena dvanda mohena bharata sarva bhutani samaham sarge janti parantapa. O sign of Bharat, O conqueror of the foe, all living entities are born into delusion, bewildered by dualities arisen from desire and hate. Desire and hate, Prabhupada comments in the purport that one desires to be the Supreme Lord himself, that's called the Icha, and the Dvesha, which is envy, one hates that the Supreme Lord is in a position of supreme enjoyment. And this Icha, Dvesha, are the fundamental causes of us again and again appearing in this material world and being conditioned by the material energy. That will be explained in more detail, as Krishna explained here in this chapter very succinctly, that Mama Maya Duratyaya, Devyeshu Gunamayi Mama Maya Duratyaya, that material energy is difficult to overcome, my divine nature. Later in the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna is describing transcendental knowledge from the point of view of Gyan, actually he explains there in more detail how the living entity becomes covered by the material energy, and it repeatedly takes birth in the material world. The fundamental cause being Bhunkte Prakriti. Krishna explains in text 21 of chapter 13, Purusha Prakriti-sto, when the living entity is situated in matter, Bhunkte Prakriti Jan Gunai. He Bhunkte Prakriti, he Prakriti Jan Gunan, Bhunkte Gunan, he enjoys the modes of material nature which are Prakriti Jan, they are produced from the material energy. And as a result of associating Karanam Guna Sangha, as a result of associating with the material energy for the purpose of Bhunkte Prakriti, for the purpose of Bhunkte Gunan, enjoying Sad Asad Yoni Jan Mishu. Again and again, we are attracted to enjoying the material nature, and we take birth in different wombs in this material world. And as Krishna is explaining here, this is accompanied by the Icha to become the Supreme Lord and to try to control the material energy and become the supreme controller by manipulating the material energy. And we're envious of the fact that the Supreme Lord is the supreme enjoyer. And therefore, we are conditioned by this material nature. In the next verse, Krishna explains, Jaisham tantikatam papam jananam punnikarmanam te dvandamahoinena mukta bhajante mandradar prataha. Persons who have acted piously in previous lives and in this life, and whose sinful actions are completely eradicated, are freed from this duality of delusion, Icha Dvesha, and they engage themselves in my service with determination. So this is the process of overcoming the influence of the material energy, and particularly the motivation and the illusory contamination of Icha Dvesha, which causes our repeated birth in this material world. Krishna explains that Punna Karma, regulated activities, pious activities. Now in the purport, Prabhupada explains that because we may not be doing pious activities, and as we were examining in the previous unit of the Bhakti Shastri course, that practice of devotional service doesn't depend upon the practice of punya karma and varnashram dharma, which produces punya. And reflecting that principle, Prabhupada in his purport explains that it is the association of the devotees which actually facilitates the conditioned soul in the development of punya. By devotional service, one automatically acquires punya, as is explained in the first verse of this chapter, the purport. Prabhupada quotes from the Srimad Bhagavatam when Sutta Goswami is responding to the sages at Naimisharanya about the Param Dharma, the ultimate process of religion. And Sutta Goswami explains there that Srinvatam Swakatara Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana. That simply the process of Bhagavad Bhakti, the Bhagavad Dharma, is that simply by Shravan Kirtan, one acquires all of the results of Varnashram Dharma. Punna Shravana Kirtana. So the devotees of the Lord, Prabhupada comments, all the devotees of the Lord traverse the earth just to recover the conditioned souls from their delusion. The devotees of the Lord who are preaching Krishna consciousness and are facilitating the conditioned souls to take to the practice of Krishna consciousness. By that activity of spreading Krishna consciousness and by practicing Krishna consciousness, one can become a punya karmi, and in that way can deliver himself from the influence of the icha dvesha, which is keeping us bound in this material world. So that concludes our study of the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And to conclude, the 7th chapter particularly explains how one can become a fully Krishna conscious person. By gradual development of Krishna consciousness in good association, the living entity can understand that due to forgetfulness of Krishna he has become conditioned by the laws of material nature. He can also understand that this human form of life is an opportunity to regain Krishna consciousness and that it should be fully utilized to attain the causeless mercy of the Supreme Lord. Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.